On the last video of the series I presented this. A computer built out of junk parts that fans have shared with me, accounting to about 120 euros of components. But there were some interesting limitations on that concept that became really apparent the newer the games you try to play. So I'm going to start addressing those limitations to build a second version. Welcome to the TrashTop, a series where I experiment with a bunch of components that people have been throwing away and that fans and friends have shared with me in our quest to build the best computer we can out of trash. Let's begin. On the previous build, during the GTA 5 benchmark, two things became clear. 4 GB of RAM is not enough for a game like that, and our dual-core Pentium CPU was at the border of its capabilities. RAM is easy. The motherboard I am using supports up to 4 RAM modules, and the advantage of using DDR2 Ram is just how darn cheap it can be. Also, as literally hundreds of people noted, I was placing the sticks in the wrong configuration for dual-channel RAM, but using every slot on the motherboard would also fix that. Thankfully, among all the components I was given, there were 2 more modules of 2 GB of 800 MHz RAM, which increases our total memory to 8 gigs, while only increasing our budget just about 10 euros. And now, the CPU. As many people also noted, this generation of Pentiums were really budget-oriented, even on release. And as we move into more modern games, a quad-core might be better. Thankfully, among my donations I have this, an Intel Core 2 Quad Q8200. While this is about 2 years older than the Pentium and has slower clock speeds, the extra cores are going to be really useful in modern games. This was a pretty amazing thing when it released in 2008, it apparently retailed for more than $200! Wow! But due to all the technological changes in the last 10 years, I saw these going around for 11 euros, which is basically the price of a Pentium, so we really did not change the total referential price that much and got quite the update. With the new CPU and extra RAM, the CSGO benchmark on 1080 jumps to almost 60 FPS. It is worth noting that the benchmark maps pushes the game beyond what you usually see on actual gameplay. An actual match will provide much better performance. The GTA 5 benchmark was still mainly limited by CPU, but performance was definitely over 30 and often close to 60, even on the very fast playing sections. The only exception was the chase scene that hovered closer to 30, but still within the limits of what I will consider playable. As I pointed out in the previous video, my main issue with the GTX 260 is the lack of support for DirectX 11, which means we cannot play most modern heavy games, not to mention a drastic lack of VRAM. So we're going to change to this. This is a GTX 570, a high-end GPU from 2008. I have seen these floating around for about 50 euros on eBay, which makes this the most expensive component in our current build, and raises the total price to around 160 euros, which is still less than 3 $60 games on release. Math! Although if you're lucky, you can find these for much less, as the previous owner found several for 10 euros each, because someone was throwing them away. Hard to believe. The good thing is that this supports all the way to DirectX 12, which means we can try almost anything. And boy, are we going to try a lot. Are you ready? Do you remember the Mad Max open world game from 2015? I was surprised to see that this computer could almost maintain 60 FPS even while driving quickly or fighting. You're going to notice that our 12 euro quad core, even though it performs much better than the old CPU, is going to be the main limiter for most of these games, but it is still capable of running the game really well. So let's change to Metal Gear Solid 5, 1080, lowest settings. While this game tends to do really well on dual cores if limited to 30 FPS, on the current setup it performs around 40 during normal gameplay, which for the standards of the channel is freaking amazing, and it still looks pretty good. Let's raise the bar a little bit more and try Fallout 4, which manages something between 30 and 50 FPS while in combat. It is worth noting that even though the CPU continues to be the main limiter, you can use some of the configuration file tweaks from my tweaking videos to limit effects, drawing distances, as well as other things, and this will allow the game to climb to somewhere between 40 and 60 FPS, even if we're in larger cities or during regular combat. Marvelous! Those are all 2015 games though. Let's move the clock to 2016 with Titanfall 2, where finally, on 1080 and on its heavier moments, we start seeing the GPU being used to the maximum. This game released almost 8 years after this GPU was made, and it can still do this on 1080. Why did anyone throw this away? Why? But that is not enough for you, because you want to be the next esports star, so you need to play Overwatch, right? Well, let's try Overwatch on this thing, using the configuration file from the video on the corner, but on 1080. The initial impression was that this version of the TrashTop was perfectly capable of keeping up with this game with a 30 FPS lock. As I pointed out on my video on this game, limiting to 30 FPS can be a sound strategy for stability, especially on a CPU bottleneck. I briefly decided to remove the limit, and sure enough, the CPU started causing problems at seemingly random moments. What I ended up doing was setting a limit at 45 FPS, and the current version of the TrashTop performs there almost flawlessly. If you're looking for a cheap way to get into Overwatch, this might be a good setup, and you might get away with using a cheaper GPU than this one. I'm talking about underutilizing GPUs. You might be thinking to yourself, everyone knows Overwatch is very light on GPU usage, so this is not that amazing of a feat. Fine, here's Doom, my favorite single-player shooter ever, running on 1080 with the shadows disabled using the method from my Intel HD video. Initial performance is good, and you can see that the GPU is working hard in some sections, but there is still some annoying freezes in certain places where the CPU bottlenecks. Limiting this game to 30 FPS, this time using the half VSync option on the Nvidia control panel, fixed all those problems. With that, the TrashTop managed to execute perfectly with solid gameplay, even when the action got really close. Not bad for a modern game, considering we're using DDR2 Ram and a GPU that released almost a decade before this game was made. Let's wrap this up with a game from this year, Nier Automata. Oh boy, I use this game to benchmark GPUs since it is well known for its performance issues and intense computational needs. And yet, on 720, the TrashTop did just fine, somewhere between 30 and 40 FPS while in combat. As I commented on my Nier Automata video, there is a fantastic mod for this game that allows you to disable global illumination from some rather fantastic effects, and on this specific instance, it allows the TrashTop to climb to somewhere between 40 and 50 FPS. Whew, so how about that? With an upgrade to the setup, but still maintaining a very reasonable budget, and using some components that are arguably close to obsolete, there are at least 7 very modern games that you can play in there with very acceptable performance. Well, I'm not done. There's still some donated components that I have not tried, so make sure you are subscribed to find out what I'm going to try next. And remember, component prices might vary a lot per region, but you never know what people are throwing away or what you can do with it. Thank you as well to the dear patrons who do their best to support this channel. I will see you all on the next one. Thankfully, among all the components I was given, there were 2 more models of 2 GB of 800 MHz RAM, which increases... Oh god.